Have you ever noticed that people who overthink, the deep thinkers, carry something that no one sees? It's a pain that doesn't scream, doesn't demand attention, it's just there, silent. But just because it's silent doesn't mean it doesn't ache in the soul. Imagine a pain that acts like an invisible weight on your being. The pain of perceiving too much, of hearing what hasn't been said, of feeling what others refuse to feel, of understanding what might be easier to ignore. Then you go to a dinner with friends. Light conversations, easy smiles, topics that don't touch the heart. Everyone gets into the groove, laughter, trivial comments, all very comfortable. But when you decide to say something truthful, the atmosphere changes. Silence descends. No one laughs, no one responds. Some shift uncomfortably. And then, as if nothing had happened, someone changes the subject, and everyone returns to their daily routine. But why does this happen? Why do so many people give so much importance to such trivial matters? In today's video, we'll understand what's behind this, and more importantly, how you can deal with these situations without losing yourself. We'll show you why the world prefers illusion, because it rewards those who conform, those who fit in, those who simply agree without ever questioning, those who pretend to be okay even when everything inside is falling apart. But deep thinkers can't live like this. They don't know how to wear masks nor maintain the appearance that everything is okay, because they see beyond forced smiles, beyond empty traditions, beyond appearances that only serve to hide emptiness. In a society that doesn't value depth, being self-aware isn't a superpower, it's a curse. And this curse begins early, even in childhood. You perceive more than you'd like to, not by choice, but by design. It's as if your being were an antenna tuned to frequencies that others have learned to ignore, frequencies that carry the weight of unspoken truths and hidden suffering. While most people survive on the surface of events, skimming across the shallow waters of social interaction, you sink without warning into the emotional subtext of every situation. A displaced glance, an altered tone, a pause that lingers too long. You feel it all, absorbing these subtle vibrations like a seismograph, detecting the tremors of human experience. This hypersensitivity, often dismissed as weakness, is actually an amplified form of perception. It's consciousness operating at a level that refuses to accept simplifications, that cannot be satisfied by the glossy veneer of everyday pleasantries. Modern psychology has given this experience a name: sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS. Dr. Elaine Aron's research reveals that approximately 20% of the population possesses this neurological trait, the characteristic of the highly sensitive person. Your nervous system literally processes stimuli more deeply, more thoroughly than others. This isn't a flaw to be corrected. It's a documented neurological reality that transforms you into a living antenna for the emotional frequencies that others filter out. But this gift comes with a brutal cost: the invisibility of your pain. You suffer, but no one sees. There's no blood, no screams, no dramatic collapses. What exists is a heavy silence, like a dense fog that envelops your emotional body. It's like carrying a stone in your chest that grows heavier with each unacknowledged truth, each moment of forced cheerfulness, each time you must pretend that shallow waters can't quench a deep thirst. This pain has no name in common language, no form that others can recognize, but it persists with the constancy of a heartbeat. Imagine being a radio receiver that can't turn down the volume. Every emotional broadcast in your vicinity, the anxiety someone won't admit, the sadness hidden behind laughter, the desperation masked as confidence, all of it floods through you. You become a repository for the feelings that others disown, a living archive of the human condition in all its unfiltered complexity. Here's where the metaphor of the opaque mirror perfectly captures your reality. You reflect what others don't want to see in themselves. Your presence alone reminds them of depths they've chosen to avoid, truths they've agreed to forget. And so instead of drawing closer, they recoil. It's not you who's out of place, it's the place that refuses to honor depth, that has collectively agreed that feeling deeply is somehow inappropriate, excessive, or inconvenient. This difference was visible even in childhood. While others played with simple joy, you found yourself lost in existential questions that had no easy answers, not because you were precocious, but because there was already a calling within you, the calling of profundity. You were the child who asked why people said they were fine when they clearly weren't, who noticed the sadness in your parents' eyes that they thought they were hiding, who felt the weight of the world before you even understood what the world was. And then you learned something cruel. Being truthful can mean being left aside. Being sensitive can attract mockery, and thinking too much can generate rejection. You discovered that authenticity is often punished while performance is rewarded. This is the origin of the wound we carry without a name. It's the paradox of feeling too much in a world that has trained itself to feel too little. The pain of being unable to turn off your own consciousness, even when that consciousness begins to burn from within, even when the very gift of seeing clearly becomes a source of isolation and misunderstanding. But why does this disturb the world so much? This question leads us to the next layer of reality, the collective refusal to touch what is real. We live in a culture that has fallen in love with appearance, not because it's true, but because it's easy. The shallow has gained the status of norm, elevated to a social sacrament. Being pleasant matters more than being authentic. Maintaining lightness has become almost a social commandment, even when it costs us the truth. This is why deep thinkers face resistance wherever they go, not for saying something wrong, but for reminding the world of what it prefers to forget. You become the thorn in the bubble of collective distraction, a presence that, even when silent, exposes the artificial nature of so much human interaction. Consider our modern digital landscape, where Guy Debord's concept of the society of the spectacle has reached its ultimate expression. On social media platforms, people curate versions of themselves that bear little resemblance to their inner reality. Instagram feeds become elaborate stage sets, LinkedIn profiles transform into personal marketing campaigns, and even intimate moments are performed for invisible audiences. The line between living and performing has blurred beyond recognition. We've created a world where the image of happiness matters more than actual contentment, where the appearance of success trumps genuine fulfillment, where the performance of connection substitutes for real intimacy. You, as a deep thinker, represent a fundamental threat to this spectacle. Your very existence suggests that there might be something more valuable than the curated self, something more meaningful than the endless performance. When you speak authentically about struggle, about complexity, about the messy reality of human experience, you're essentially pulling back the curtain on the wizard, revealing that much of what passes for reality is elaborate theater designed to avoid genuine encounter. The metaphor here is unmistakable. You are an uncomfortable mirror, not one of those that flatters and beautifies, but one that shows the cracks, the inconsistencies, the places where the makeup has smeared. And nobody wants to see themselves that way. When you speak something true, something that pierces through the collective agreement to stay superficial, the social environment doesn't respond with embrace, but with embarrassment. Smiles dissolve, eyes look away. The conversation continues as if nothing profound had been said, as if your words were somehow inappropriate or out of bounds. This is the theater of superficiality, where the audience demands entertainment, not reflection, where depth is seen as a party foul, where authenticity is viewed as social awkwardness. The more you try to offer substance, the more you feel the weight of subtle exclusion, the gentle but persistent pressure to return to safer, shallower waters. Think about how this plays out in everyday interactions. You're at a gathering where everyone is discussing their latest purchases, their vacation plans, their career moves, all valid topics, but all carefully avoiding anything that might touch the heart. When you try to redirect the conversation towards something meaningful, perhaps the anxiety everyone seems to be carrying, or the way technology is reshaping human connection, or the strange emptiness that can exist even in the midst of apparent success, you're met with polite discomfort and swift subject changes. This social dynamic creates what we might call depth punishment, a subtle but persistent discouragement of any attempt to go beneath the surface. The punishment isn't overt, it's delivered through withdrawal of attention, through the gentle suggestion that you're being too intense or overthinking things, through the social pressure to lighten up and just enjoy yourself. The consequence, you begin to silence yourself. Not out of fear, but out of existential economy. You realize that each truth spoken on shallow ground returns as silence, or worse, as judgment. You learn to ration your authenticity, to portion out your depth in carefully measured doses that won't overwhelm the social ecosystem. But this silencing has a devastating side effect. It imprisons your essence. When you consistently choose social comfort over personal truth, when you repeatedly choose belonging over authenticity, something inside you begins to wither. The very gift that makes you who you are, your capacity for depth, for truth-telling, for seeing beyond the surface, gets buried under layers of social accommodation. This is where psychology enters with force, especially Carl Jung's insights, showing us that repressing our own conscious nature only deepens internal suffering. Jung understood that when we betray our essential nature for social acceptance, we create an internal split that manifests as depression, anxiety, and a profound sense of meaninglessness. To understand why this suffering is inevitable for those who see beyond the surface, we need to enter the dynamics between consciousness, shadow, and isolation. And this leads us directly to the next part. Carl Jung taught us that the process of individuation, the path toward authentic selfhood, necessarily separates us from the collective before it can reintegrate us with it. It's a required exile, as essential as the chrysalis stage for a butterfly, because to discover who you truly are, you must first stop being what others expect you to be. This separation isn't a punishment, it's a developmental necessity, as natural and inevitable as adolescence itself. When you begin to see your own shadow, your fears, contradictions, repressed impulses, the parts of yourself that don't fit the idealized self-image, something fundamental breaks, the illusion of normalcy. You can no longer pretend that you're just like everyone else, that your inner life is as simple and manageable as others claim theirs to be. And the deeper you go into this shadow work, the more you perceive that society as a whole also has its shadow, but collectively refuses to acknowledge it. This is the point of fracture, the moment when your path diverges from the mainstream. Because in becoming conscious of your own pain, you inevitably become conscious of the collective pain that remains unaddressed. You see the depression hiding behind productivity culture, the desperation lurking beneath consumer spending, the profound loneliness that exists even in our hyper-connected world. You recognize the shadow of a society that promotes happiness while being systematically miserable, that preaches self-love while encouraging self-criticism, that values authentic connection while rewarding performance. And this awareness isolates you, not because you choose isolation, but because authentic vision requires a certain distance from the collective dream. You can no longer participate unconsciously in social rituals that feel hollow, can no longer laugh at jokes that aren't funny, can no longer pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. You aren't rejected for being different, you're rejected for being a mirror that doesn't reflect appearance, but essence. A mirror that shows not what people want to see, but what is actually there. Jung described this isolation as the destiny of the awakened in a culture that worships the sleep of unconsciousness. And this destiny is harsh because it removes you from the social dance. You can no longer move to music that feels discordant to your authentic rhythm. You become like someone who has learned to see color in a black and white world. The gift is extraordinary, but it makes it impossible to relate to others' experience in the same way. This brings us back with profound depth to the quote that haunts this entire exploration. Lucidity is the wound closest to the sun. Lucidity is light, the kind of light that reveals truth. But it's also the kind of light that burns, because revelation is rarely comfortable. The sun in this metaphor represents absolute truth, pure consciousness, the unfiltered reality of existence. The closer you get to this truth, through self-awareness, through honest introspection, through the courage to see what is, rather than what you wish were, the more you experience the wound of lucidity. This wound isn't damage. It's the natural consequence of proximity to truth. Think of it like spiritual sunburn, evidence that you've been exposed to something too intense for comfort, but also too important to avoid. The wound comes from having comfortable illusions burned away, from losing the protective ignorance that shields most people from the full intensity of existence. When you get close to the sun of truth, the wax wings of your egoic defenses begin to melt. The stories you've told yourself about who you are and how the world works start to dissolve under the heat of genuine insight. This is terrifying and painful, but it's also liberating, because only when the false self melts away can the authentic self emerge. It's like Icarus, but with a crucial difference. The myth warns against flying too close to the sun, suggesting that the pursuit of truth leads to destruction. But what if the real tragedy isn't the fall? It's the solitary flight. What if the wound of lucidity isn't a punishment, but a badge of courage, evidence that you've dared to fly toward truth when others remain safely grounded in illusion?
And perhaps this is why so many prefer to live at low emotional altitude, where ignorance can be mistaken for peace and superficiality for harmony. Up there, in the thin air of consciousness, breathing is more difficult. The view is magnificent, but the isolation is real. But for those who dare to ascend, the wound of lucidity becomes inevitable. And contrary to what we might think, this pain isn't a sign of error. It's evidence of awakening. It's proof that you've chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, depth over ease. And this is why, even wounded, you continue offering support to others. Even exhausted, you listen, embrace, sustain. But the question remains, for how long? This question leads us to the next part of our exploration.
If what I've said echoes inside you, comment here now. I also feel too much. Let's transform this invisible loneliness into a silent network of recognition. How many times have you thought you were the only one, that your sensitivity was an exaggeration, that your lucidity was a burden? You are not alone. There are many like you, silent but attentive, tired but awake, wounded but true. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. This channel is a shelter for those who feel too much in a world that feels too little. Here, your depth is welcome. Being emotionally conscious in an unconscious world isn't just lonely, it's exhausting beyond measure. You become the gravitational center of relationships, the stable point around which others orbit their chaos. You're the shoulder that listens, the presence that sustains, the space where others collapse, without ever asking how you are, without ever considering that the harbor itself might need anchoring. This is the curse of those who see clearly. They perceive others' pain before it's even verbalized. Before someone says, "I'm struggling," you've already seen it in their posture, heard it in the spaces between their words, felt it in the quality of their silence. And by compassion, or perhaps by compulsion, you offer shelter. But Who shelters the shelter? The metaphor of a safe harbor captures this perfectly. A harbor appears solid, reliable, calm, a refuge from the storms that rage in open water. Ships arrive battered and seeking safety, and the harbor provides it generously, without question. But harbors experience constant erosion. The very act of providing shelter, of absorbing the impact of other storms, gradually wears away at their foundations. And unlike ships, harbors can't sail away to find their own refuge. This erosion has a clinical name in psychology: empathic burnout. It's the point where caring becomes draining, where your capacity for compassion exceeds your capacity for self-preservation. It's when presence transforms from gift to burden, and you realize you're disappearing piece by piece, not through any malice from others, but because you never learned to include yourself in the equation of care. But empathic burnout isn't just about giving too much. It's about giving in the wrong way. There's a crucial difference between healthy compassion and unhealthy emotional absorption. Healthy compassion allows you to witness another's pain without taking it on as your own. It creates space for their experience while maintaining boundaries around your own emotional territory. Unhealthy absorption, on the other hand, dissolves these boundaries entirely. You don't just see their pain, you become it. Their anxiety becomes your anxiety. Their depression seeps into your nervous system. Their chaos disrupts your inner peace.
This absorption happens automatically for highly sensitive people. Your nervous system, designed to process information deeply, doesn't distinguish between your emotions and others. When someone enters your space carrying intense emotional energy, your system responds as if that energy were your own. You become an emotional sponge, soaking up whatever others bring, often without realizing it's happening. Being the strong one is a particularly dangerous social role because it comes with an implicit contract. You provide stability in exchange for connection. But this contract is fundamentally unequal. Others get to be vulnerable, to express their full range of human experience, while you get to be helpful. They get to have bad days, you get to fix bad days. They get to fall apart, you get to hold things together. The tragedy is that nobody asks if the strong one is okay. Strength in our cultural understanding is self-sustaining. If you're strong, you must not need support. If you're wise, you must have all the answers. If you're stable, you must not experience your own storms. And you've internalized this mythology. You don't know how to ask for help because you've been conditioned to be the helper. You don't know how to express your own needs because you've specialized in meeting others' needs. You've become so skilled at reading the emotional weather of everyone around you that you've lost touch with your own internal climate. This dynamic creates what we might call emotional invisibility. Your struggles don't register on others' radar because they conflict with your established role. If you try to express vulnerability, it's often met with surprise or discomfort. But you're always so together, they say, as if your competence in helping others somehow makes you immune to needing help yourself. The model exhausts because it's fundamentally unsustainable. No one can carry the emotional weight of multiple relationships without eventually buckling under the pressure. Even the most conscious, most capable people have limits. The difference is that highly sensitive people often don't recognize these limits until they've been crossed, because their entire identity becomes wrapped up in their capacity to handle whatever comes their way. But what if this overwhelming sense of responsibility wasn't a sign of failure, but evidence of a wrong turn? What if, instead of carrying everything, you began to use your depth as direction rather than prison? This transition is not only possible, it's essential for your survival and growth. The key lies in recognizing that your sensitivity isn't meant to be a burden you bear, but a compass that guides you toward your authentic path. And this realization leads us to our final exploration. There comes a moment when the pain of being profound must transform itself. This isn't about denying what you feel or pretending that depth is easy to carry.
It's about recognizing that there's a calling embedded within your sensitivity, a purpose woven into your capacity to see what others miss. The wound of lucidity, that same wound we described as closest to the sun, doesn't exist to punish you. It exists to remind you of something crucial. You see because it's necessary that someone sees. Your pain isn't random, it's purposeful. You feel too much because the world feels too little. And in this imbalance, your hypersensitivity serves as a form of consciousness for the collective. Think of yourself as an early warning system for the human experience. Just as canaries in coal mines detected dangerous gases before they could harm the miners, your sensitivity detects emotional and spiritual toxins before they poison entire communities. Your discomfort in superficial environments isn't neurosis, it's accurate perception. Your inability to ignore suffering isn't weakness, it's moral clarity. The loneliness that feels so familiar to deep thinkers can be read as exile or as incubation. Every period of isolation becomes a time of inner strengthening, where consciousness deepens and wisdom develops. Like a seed that must spend time in darkness before it can emerge into light, your solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. Here, the metaphor of internal fire becomes essential. Yes, it burns. Yes, it sometimes feels like it might consume you entirely. But fire also illuminates. Fire transforms. Fire purifies. And most importantly, fire attracts. Your authentic flame draws others who, like you, have been navigating in darkness, not from ignorance, but from lack of genuine mirrors, from the absence of people willing to shine their own light honestly. Consider the lighthouse metaphor more deeply. A lighthouse doesn't chase ships or call out desperately for attention. It simply stands in its truth and shines its authentic light. It doesn't worry about whether ships will come. It trusts that those who need its guidance will naturally be drawn to its beacon. The lighthouse understands something profound. Authentic presence is magnetic in a way that performance never can be. When you honor your depth instead of hiding it, when you speak your truth instead of managing others' comfort, when you allow your authentic self to be visible, you become this kind of lighthouse. You don't need to force connections or convince people of your worth. Your genuine presence does the work of attraction naturally, drawing those who are ready for real connection while allowing those who prefer superficial interaction to find their community elsewhere. This transformation from wound to mission doesn't happen overnight. It requires a fundamental shift in how you understand your role in the world. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who must fix others' pain, you begin to see yourself as someone who models what it looks like to feel deeply and remain whole. Instead of absorbing others' emotions, you learn to witness them with compassion while maintaining your own emotional integrity. The world doesn't need more forced smiles or artificial positivity. It needs courageous authenticity, people willing to be real in a world that rewards pretense, willing to feel deeply in a culture that promotes numbness, willing to speak truth in environments that prefer comfortable lies. This is the mission of deep thinkers, to change the world not through force, but through presence. A presence so genuine that it dissolves pretense simply by existing. A lucidity that, while painful, ultimately heals, first yourself, then others who encounter your authentic being. Your depth isn't a burden to be managed, it's a gift to be shared. Your sensitivity isn't a flaw to be corrected, it's a tool for transformation. Your pain isn't meaningless suffering, it's the labor of bringing more consciousness into an unconscious world. When you fully embrace this understanding, something magical happens. The wound begins to heal, not through denial, but through purpose. The pain transforms from something that happens to you into something that moves through you in service of a larger vision. you stop being a victim of your own consciousness and become its willing vessel. If you've made it this far, it's because you needed to hear this message. Take advantage of having found our channel and check out our latest video, Learn to Read People in Seconds with Nietzsche's 18 Harsh Truths to reflect on existential pain and emotional isolation experienced by deep thinkers in a society that rewards superficiality. In that video, we explore how expanded consciousness can generate loneliness, how Carl Jung's thinking helps us understand this trajectory, and why accepting your depth can be the first step toward transforming your pain into mission. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing so you don't miss any more videos from our channel. Until next time, take care of your mind, your soul, and your truth. You're not alone on this path. Not anymore.